Hi everybody and welcome. Hopefully you can hear and you can see me okay. Welcome to this webinar. It's the second in a series and we're going to kick off now. We're just a couple of minutes behind while we're waiting for some people to join. So hello from Deep Science Ventures here in London, UK. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. And today it's great to be working with Nucleate on this webinar, and together we're attempting to make scoping more visible to all of our communities. So a few bits to start with. We'll be recording this session and you'll be able to find it on the Deep Science Ventures site afterwards. Please do all switch your cameras on. We'd love to see your faces, and please pop your microphones on mute if you've not already done so. And we suspect that we've probably got quite a great collection of people here in the virtual room, a range of sectors and organisations. So if you can, please do pop your name, your organisation and your country in the Q&A now, so that we can really get a sense of where everybody's joining from. The Q&A function will be live throughout the session, and we'll pose your questions sourced from the Q&A chat to some of our speakers during, if we've got time, and then maybe at the end as well. So please do get involved and pop all your questions in there. And also share and tag us on social media. So that's all the housekeeping. I'm Claire Thorne. I'm venture partner at Deep Science Ventures, where deep tech companies are built in-house from scratch. And I'm hosting the webinar today. And Deep Science Ventures has now built around 35 deep tech companies. It's a portfolio worth about £250 million. It produces more spin-outs per year than 92% of UK universities, which always blows my mind. It's built more carbon removal companies than any institution in the world, including Imperial, Harvard and Stanford. And a recent success is Mission Zero, which is now backed by Elon Musk as the Global X Prize winner, the only UK company winning that prize. And then in 2021, all of Cancer Research UK's oncology spin-outs, 3/4 of them were built by the Deep Science Ventures team. And I'm really personally very proud that it's really excelling on gender diversity too. We've got 4 times more gender diverse founding teams than spin-outs from UK universities. So lots to celebrate. And the work I've been doing at Deep Science Ventures alongside Dominic Falco, who you're going to hear from today, Thane Campbell also, and the team at the whole team there really is on the development of the Venture Science Doctorate. And back in October last year, we held our first webinar. It's almost 6 months ago now, and we was unveiling the Venture Science Doctorate, which is this new flavour of PhD, putting venture at the heart of research. And within 10 years, the VSD will train around 1,000 venture scientists per year. So if you've not already seen it, you can watch it on YouTube. And since October, we've been totally overwhelmed with interest and support. So applications opened last month, and we've had over 200 candidates apply to be in that first cohort of the Venture Science Doctorate in September this year. So I know there's lots of you on here today that have already applied, which is wonderful. And those of you on here today that haven't yet done so and you're tempted, please do so. Applications are still open and it closes on 1st of May. So you're going to hear lots more about the Venture Science Doctorate throughout the session. And we're going to take you through a tour of all things scoping, which is an approach to moonshot R&D really. You're going to hear about what it is, how it's used, why it's useful, which organisations are doing it, and which are yet to be transformed by it. Our founders at Deep Science Ventures use Scoping Ontology, our Scoping Ontology, to shape their own innovation roadmap. And it's really central to the Venture Science Doctorate PhD programme that we're going to tell you a little bit more about. So PhD candidates will start with the same first principle design process that all DSV founders use. And so let's look ahead to the agenda and see what's in store today. We're really confident that there's some learnings, some tools that you can take away and apply, particularly throughout the workshop session, if you want to do entrepreneurship in science. We've got another packed schedule. We're going to share all the slides afterwards. And like I say, the recording will be online, and we've got some great speakers. So where we have time, we'll take those questions throughout. And if not, we'll save some up for the end. Let's crack on. So first speakers today, we're really chuffed to have our friends at Nucleate supporting the webinar today, and Nucleate chapters around the world joining us online. I'm handing over now to Thane Campbell, colleague at Deep Science Ventures, who's been full-time on the Venture Science Doctorate leading it, and also Abby from Director of Strategy from Nucleate UK. Thane, over to you.
Thanks, Claire. And so thank you so much to everyone who's joined us today from the US, from the UK and Japan, people who've come from Ghana and Singapore. We've had so many people joining from so many different interesting places. And thanks for those who have told us in the chat as well. All to hear about scoping, this central innovation road mapping technique to everything that we do at DSV. You'll hear more about that and in the Venture Science Doctorate. As Claire was saying, a few months ago, we started telling people about the VSD, and over 1,200 of you have written in with your interest in joining, people who wanted to hear more, people who wanted to host these new venture scientists in their labs. And we are so excited and grateful for this tidal wave of support and interest that people have been contributing to. And you've been writing to us about solving global challenges, abating CO2 emissions, accelerating clinical trials. And you've also been writing about the limitations of science entrepreneurship training, where you see them, be they at your universities or in other training spaces. That's why we are really excited to team up with Nucleate today to bring you this webinar to share what we know about building high impact science companies with more students, with more early career researchers who really want to. There are many reasons why we are fostering and nurturing this conversation around innovation road mapping. And I just want to highlight two of them. We really do need more high impact science, and early career scientists want to solve our societal problems and actually bring us that science. On the need for high impact science, the last 50 years, global GDP per capita has rocketed by 1,200%, while life expectancy has increased by 14 years. Countless other metrics tell a tale of undeniable progress, better, longer, and richer lives made possible by technological and scientific breakthroughs. But while science has driven momentous improvements in many areas, in others, it lags woefully behind, and these are the more complex challenges, the ones that require networks or systems of new solutions. And so we lack the innovation infrastructure to take these challenges on in many cases. Consider the areas of health and climate change, which you'll be hearing more about today. The COVID pandemic recently claimed 7 million lives, even though the scientific community and people as visible as Bill Gates have been telling us for years in advance that something like this was coming. Meanwhile, a quarter of the global population will be displaced in the next 50 years due to global warming. At the root of these challenges is not necessarily a lack of scientific knowledge, but a failure to combine that knowledge into coherent sets of viable, scalable, and sustainable solutions. A failure, in other words, of the capabilities of our scientific economy to keep pace with the evolving complexity of the threats facing humanity. If we're to tackle these existential challenges, drastic and well-coordinated change is required at the level of sectors, including climate, including health, agriculture, and computation. And this is what so many of you have been already expressing your interest in, and probably why many of you have joined us today for this conversation. It's something that goes right to the heart of our mission at Deep Science Ventures, where we are creating a future where the humanity and the planet can thrive by combining available scientific knowledge and founder type scientists into those high impact ventures. And so we know that we need more high impact science. What a lot of people that I speak to sometimes miss is that actually early career scientists are ready for this challenge and want to deliver that. Again, thinking about COVID, it sparked this massive uptick on campuses around the world, and particularly in the US, in student entrepreneurship. Even before this, students have been increasingly thinking more proactively about what they're going to do with their PhD and what careers they're going to go after. They've been going into industry much more. They've been going into policy making, places where they feel that they can tackle the climate and health challenges that are shaping our generation. I spoke at a TXP panel about a month ago, and this really perceptive audience member asked me, how can more PhD researchers pivot into meaningful, high-impact research? And she was referring to this moment that a lot of scientists, be they early career student or even later, encounter, where they start to question, what am I going to do with everything that I've learned? And when I'm going to work on the really big challenge that I guess I went into science dreaming that I would work on. I've spoken to people at prestigious universities like Berkeley asking me the same thing much later in their career. And so you're going to hear two of the best answers we can come up with today, which actually avoid this crisis by thinking earlier about what we need to be doing, scoping, so helping to roadmap that research experience. And you're going to hear about the Venture Science Doctorate, which we also hope will completely remove this existential crisis from the scientific endeavor. Thanks so much for joining, and I'm going to hand back to Claire.
Thank you, Thane. That's fab. Do we have Abby as well?
Well, firstly, thank you all so much for coming to this webinar collaboration. Great to see so many different locations in the chat. I've seen Chicago, Illinois, Uganda, India. This is excellent to see so many people. And so we're really excited to bring you this collaboration today, focused on scoping, an approach to sort of road mapping science entrepreneurship. My name is Abby. I'm the founding director of strategy for Nucleate UK. I'm based in Cambridge. And like my colleagues at Nucleate, I'm passionate about how science-led innovation can drive better outcomes for the environment and for patients respectively, especially in my personal domain of cancer immunology, where I know DSV do a lot of work. So I'm delighted to tell you a bit about why we at Nucleate are so excited about the scoping ontology being discussed today and how the broader Venture Science Doctorate fits in with our mission. So firstly, what is Nucleate? Well, we're an open, non-profit biotech organization with a mission to sort of empower the academic trainees of today to become tomorrow's leaders in life sciences. And we do this primarily by helping them build exceptional biotech companies. And our key values include fostering a sense of community and collaboration in the early life sciences industry. And so I'm delighted to be sharing our excitement for deep science ventures scoping methodologies and how these may be useful to people across biotech ecosystems across the UK. And so our flagship program is the Activator, which is a structured program we take our cohorts on to develop the IP into real startups. And this is primarily PhD students with really exciting technology that they want to turn into a company. However, we've grown over the past few years to so much more than that. And the expansion into broader projects also necessitates a much more rigorous approach to innovation road mapping. There'll be more on different innovation road mapping techniques in the next panel. Can we go on to the next slide, please? So Genesis and Catalyze, for example, these are two of our other programs that we run alongside the Activator, and these are slightly earlier stage programs. Now, Genesis is yet to be fully established in the UK, but it does run virtually, and it focuses on delivering a hands-on curriculum to teach scientists how to turn their ideas into real ventures. Now, careful scoping out of how to best action these deep science ideas into real societal outcomes makes for far more impactful ventures. So the outcomes graph technique and broader scoping ontology built by DSV could be a really great way that our future Genesis members can have more precise, evidence-based discussions when they look to transform science into businesses later down the line. And there'll be a workshop specifically on these techniques later on. And Catalyze is our new program that was spun out of Simbi UK, designed to introduce people to the world of biotech entrepreneurship. So this is another early stage program we run, and people in the Catalyze program often come from an undergraduate or master's background. So this is a really powerful crash course in life sciences innovation that helps people launch their venturing further, often into further Nucleate programs or other careers and fellowships. And the new Venture Science Doctorate could actually be a really great opportunity for our Catalyze alumni who want to pursue deep tech science-led innovation but have become a little bit disillusioned by the traditional machine of academia, which perhaps is not best suited to the modern requirements of deep science venturing. So we definitely recommend you check out the details and see whether this may be a really good fit for you if you're one of our catalyzed participants particularly. And Thane will be talking more about the exact details of the program later on in today's event. Now, we also think there's really good potential for collective scoping to support interdisciplinary research teams within our programs. So for example, in our flagship program, The Activator, the first thing we do is facilitate team formation between 3 tracks. So that is PhD scientists, postdoc scientists, clinicians, and then finally business students. And this can be a great opportunity for people to find links and look for interdisciplinary synergies. There we go, you can see me now. For example, people working in SynBio and people working in polymer chemistry might be able to work together to find new use cases for their IP. Say you have IP on a new bacterial strain, somebody working in polymer chemistry can help you target that for degrading polluting plastics within a river. And business students and clinicians as well working in concert might be able to add market pull or public health data to better refine and target the scoping process towards these oriented outcome solutions that we're looking to get from our science. So I know this was a bit of a whistle-stop tour about what we do at Nucleate, but today marks a really extremely exciting moment in UK biotech entrepreneurship. If you do have any further questions about what we do and how the Venture Science Doctorate and scoping process might fit into our activities, please do feel free to reach out via LinkedIn, Twitter, or email. You can find our email at our website, that's nucleate.xyz. And we really do believe DSV and Nucleate together have a crucial role to play in our broader ecosystems where we operate in Cambridge, Oxford, and London in the UK. Of course, we're looking to expand further than that. And of course, if Nucleate teams can synergistically benefit from these scoping methodologies, or if you want to apply to the VSD program, that's even better, which is why we're so excited about collaborating for this event today.
Okay, thank you so much. So now we're going to move on and we're going to hear from Dom Falco, co-founder of Deep Science Ventures, and he'll be joined by some panelists that he's going to introduce. So Dom built Imperial College's accelerator from zero back in the day, and then he went on to co-found Deep Science Ventures about 7 years ago. He's going to lead this next session, so handing over to Dom to introduce his panelists, talking about different approaches to road mapping and the value to founders.
Thank you so much, everyone, and Abby, thank you so much as well for participating and helping us organise this. I'm absolutely psyched to have Barbara Diehl, the Chief Partnership Officer of SPRIN-D, and Doc Brown, Schmidt Innovations Fellow, who's working on road mapping in enteric methane and agricultural methane emissions, on the line to talk about how they are implementing road mapping and scoping in their work. I would like to ask Doc to introduce himself first, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Dom. My background is I'm a physicist who got lured into ag for its impact on climate a decade ago when I was at ARPA-H, where I developed one of the first soil carbon programs that the US had done in quite a long time for ARPA-H's first carbon dioxide removal program. And after work at Google X and Pivot Bio, I'm focused now on this ag methane problem and working towards developing a nonprofit institute to help solve it.
Yeah, it's truly an incredible blend of places that you've been. ARPA-H, also known for its kind of grand challenge approach, Google X for its project-centric approach and fail-fast mentality. You've worked at some of the best places in the world for the thing that you're doing now, which is kind of systematically breaking down problems. I wondered if you'd tell us how and why you ended up focusing on agricultural methane emissions of the set of things you could have worked on.
Yeah. I first got into agriculture because I saw enormous opportunity for impact in carbon, and I often saw that the tools it was using were not as advanced as similar tools in other industries like medical and oil and gas. So fast forward to a couple of years ago, I took a big look at the climate picture, and a substantial part of warming, about a third of gross warming, is from methane. And the biggest part of that is from agricultural methane. So I saw that's about 0.2 degrees of our 1 to 1.1 degrees warming, which is an enormous part, and you look at how much of it is technically or economically addressable with solutions today, it's very little and is expected to grow. So that got me interested. And I jumped into this perspective of saying, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? And we could say is reducing temperature in 2050, right? And reducing temperature overall globally. And so we can work backwards from there. And a value of methane that I then saw on top of that is methane only reduces by half every 12 years in the atmosphere. So it has this time responsiveness that fit the solution. So this combination of like huge impact, underlooked and undersolved, and lining up with when we need to solve the problem by, made it a really compelling place to go.
I think one of the things that is most remarkable about that is that one of the things you said was that not very much of it is addressable, of the effect of methane. I think when other people look at climate problems, they look at it from the opposite lens. They think about what we can do now and what is available now to us. I was going to ask you, what gives you the confidence in approaching problems like this that don't appear addressable? Like, what is it? What kind of methodology have you developed over time in road mapping that gives you the confidence to take on problems that other people have left unaddressed or perceive as unaddressable?
Some of that confidence comes from my ARPA-H experience and seeing people say this can't be done, and then seeing project teams literally do something that a reviewer on the review panel has said was literally impossible. So I've seen that enough times. I think what gives me the confidence, though, is that there are types of gaps that are systematic, right? There are gaps. Frequently, people who have technical solutions look for things that are ready-made, even for scientific startups. They don't go 1 to 2 layers deeper. So there's depth that you can extract that way. You see that things that don't have a clear market solution, so for example, emissions in the developing world where the markets are not well set up, tend to get ignored by market actors. And you tend to see things that systematically improve all solution development implementation sometimes don't have an owner, right? And so that's the case, and something I'm focused on, which is measurement technology for testing solutions in agricultural methane. Is this sort of thing where no one is quite incentivized enough to really own it and drive it forward themselves.
And so you've got this thing which looks that other people think are very hard. You have this confidence that it can be addressed through your experience and through having seen problems like this knocked down. How do you start to prioritize the remaining problems in the field when you think about addressing them? Because if there are lots of unresolved things, how do you tell what the problems that are kind of hard and what the problems that are soft are that are worth going after?
Yeah, so the first thing, I as I mentioned, I had this 2050 goal, right? And from that 2050 goal, I could work backwards. I could say, okay, that means we want 90% adoption by 2040, right? That means we need the solutions and the channels up by 2030. And that means we need research that begins today. It means that, and then when you looked on that perspective, you said, okay, I just ended on 4 things that we needed urgently to start working on, not to solve in the next year, but the track needed to be going. One was a flourishing of solutions. A second was the capacity to test and validate those solutions. A third was the market, setting up the markets and channels to deliver the solutions, which is particularly important in the developing world. And looking at those 3 things, I said, okay, that's my main question of the roadmap, and I can see how those 3 big parts intersect. And then I went looking for gaps, right? Where, because obviously there are people thinking about all of these 3 things, right? And there's also parts of me that are better at solving one problem than the other, which is always worth reflecting on when you do these sorts of things. And, one gap that came up really quickly is there's a huge focus on solving the problem for animals that are in confined systems, like, pens and feedlots. And it turns out that's, less than a quarter of the green methane emissions from cows. So methane emissions, mostly to back up, come from the exhalation of cows and the digestion of grass. And so suddenly we see this huge gap where even the people working on the problem have sort of grabbed onto the part that's most addressable and are not looking as much on the part that's the largest part of the problem. And so that then looks like a really fertile place to start asking questions from, like, how do we solve that bigger part of the problem?
I mean, I've definitely experienced that as a consistent factor, that things that seem really hard, that serves as a barrier to entry, that stops people entering that space and starting to solve that. And you found that even amongst the people who are focusing on this thing that seemed initially unaddressable. So that's super interesting. I've probably got one last question for you before I move on, which is that even with all of that experience across institutions that do this at scale and professionally, have there been parts of road mapping the kind of agricultural methane emission space that have felt nevertheless slow or frustrating for you, or that you felt have been inefficient to do alone?
Yeah. I think with any of these, I've jumped into new fields a number of times. I think one thing that's really rough is the beginning. You're not a subject matter expert and you maybe don't have access. I didn't have access to, on a regular basis, to someone who is co-working with me on it. I think there's this difficult part at the beginning. You're taking notes, but you don't really know how to bucket them. And there's an enormous amount, like once I had my framework, I could rebucket it, but my notes were not in that kind of bucket. My questions were not efficiently addressed. And so like when I look back and think about the inefficiencies, it's really about, I would do more processes of like articulating the questions clearly and trying to get to that framing as sort of a regular activity, because once you have framing that feels really strong, things start to fall into place. And before that, you feel a little bit like you're like in a dark hallway trying to find the light switch.
That's a beautiful metaphor to finish on. And I think Eirini will touch on this technique of reframing or relensing when she talks a little bit about scoping a little bit later on. But it's that's fascinating and brilliant. And I'm super glad and reassured to have someone like you focusing on the majority of the rest of the emissions. I invited as well Barbara to come and talk to us as well, because I think she offers a kind of a different perspective. So Doc is someone working in an organization on a particular challenge, whereas Barbara is working on an organization that is working on many challenges in parallel. So it gives you a different kind of perspective of what this sort of machinery looks like to go about breaking down problems. And Barbara, I wondered if you would be so kind as to introduce yourself to the panel and to the audience as well.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Dom, and thank you for inviting me. And hello to everyone out there. It's a pleasure to be joining you for this webinar. Yeah. So my name is Barbara, and whenever I'm introducing myself to international audiences, I always say I'm a mongrel. Yeah. So in a previous life, I trained as a historian, but for some reason, my weird and wondrous journeys have led me into the innovation space, and it's been an exciting journey. I've worked on many different areas of the sort of the innovation debate on the political sphere, but also on the very applied teaching and training side when it comes to entrepreneurship. So and now I'm working with SPRIN-D, that's the Federal Agency for Disruptive Innovation in Germany. It's a new entity, and it's kind of a political experiment where the German government has sort of ventured into the space of trying to find ideas and trying to really implement new funding instruments and tools for looking at breakthroughs. So we've been at the job for about 2 and a bit years. It's been a roller coaster ride because obviously, we're dealing with public money. Public money comes with lots and lots and lots of rules and regs attached, and lots of things that you cannot and can't do. And it's really interesting because obviously, the brief when we were handed this, they said, oh, you should do things completely differently, but please, here are the 5 volumes of budgetary rules and regs that you have to stick to. And we said, well, that's not possible, is it? I mean, if you're really supposed to do things completely differently. I think what you've referred to, Dom, is the kind of the challenge-based approach that we have started in 2021, which is this idea that you really identify a very extremely ambitious goal and societal problem that needs to be solved in the future, and that needs to be solved with probably a kind of a time horizon of, let's say, 20, 25 years. Not really something that needs to be solved, that probably cannot be solved tomorrow or even in 1 or 2 years. And really put this out there as something that we should strive for and should be aiming at solving. And then, and I mean, we're completely aware, probably same as Doc just mentioned, that maybe that goal and maybe that challenge cannot be reached, but that lots of people are given the chance and given the opportunity to actually have a shot at it. And so we have now kickstarted about 5 challenges. We have 5 challenges on the go at the moment in a variety of different fields, biomedical, but also long duration energy storage, one about carbon to value, so about really drawing atmospheric CO2 and transforming it into new value chains, on new computing concepts, and we will be kickstarting 2 more later on this year, so stay tuned. Yeah, so that's we've been at this, and obviously it's been a learning journey, yeah, happy to answer questions about that. What can I tell you that you all don't already know?
So for those the audience who are just hearing about SPRIN for the first time, one thing they might not know is whether or not you have to be based in Germany in order to apply for funding or to solve one of the problems that SPRIN has raised. No, you don't have to. So that's so we found a kind of a funding mechanism that actually allows us particularly for the challenge program, to actually also be internationally based, which is really exciting for us because again, you know, we are funded by German taxpayers' money, and the fact that we are actually having something that allows us to have these calls open to international applicants is really exciting, because we think that the problems and the challenges that we set out are so huge that we need all the collective brain power, literally globally, to really tackle to really tackle those. So yeah. It's, I mean, super important, and it seems beneficial both for the world and for SPRIN in terms of the set of ideas you're going to see and be able to support, and the probability of solving the challenge. So I like absolutely think that's laudable. I was going to ask you how SPRIN goes about narrowing down to pick those challenge areas in the first place. Because I think for people considering a venture science doctoral program, it'll be a similar sort of problem, working out where in the first place to pick a topic and spend a PhD on. So like you mentioned new computing concepts and carbon to value, like where did those challenge areas come from?
Yeah. So I mean, it's really at the moment it's an internal process whereby we have we work with our innovation managers, who are kind of akin to program managers at DARPA or at ARPA, and they have a lot of kind of they basically bring forward ideas for potential challenges. We have an analyst team that really does the first round of kind of scoping and mapping in terms of who else is doing something in that space, and is there really kind of a niche that hasn't been looked at. And so it's a kind of an internal whittling down process. Of course, we're talking to outside experts as well, getting their advice and getting their view on things. Then of course we have to square that with the funding available. That's also, I mean, you know, what kind of money do you have to put behind a challenge like that, and how that squares with the available budget that we have. So it's at the moment it's a largely internal process, but we consult a lot with obviously external organizations and other people in the field who can advise us.
Yeah, it's super interesting to hear the kind of commonalities between, you know, looking for neglected space. That's also something that we heard in Doc's summary as well, of how he went about it. When you, I mean, you place a lot of importance, it sounds like, on the innovation manager. What are some of the kind of rarer but more important characteristics of someone chosen to be an innovation manager? Because I think my suspicion is that some of these characteristics may also be similar for people considering doing the VSD or developing those skill sets during a VSD.
Yeah, usually, I mean, the innovation managers are fairly senior in the sense of that they they usually have venture experience in the sense of that they have built ventures themselves, exited ventures, have a kind of an entrepreneurial profile, but also have technological expertise in a particular area which they can bring to the table. So it's kind of a combination of both of these kind of entrepreneurial experience, but also knowledge in a particular technology or science area.
Okay, got it. So you might start to call them people with venture and science background, maybe even venture scientists, one might say.
So the venture doctorates, let's say, fast forward about 10, 15 years, maybe.
Oh, come on. Give us 3 years and we'll be
okay, 3 years. If they really do a venture every year that they come out. Of course.
And I was going to just highlight, because we've only got a few minutes left, one of the things that I thought was really exciting that SPRIN-D was doing. I wonder if you would tell us about the Serendipity Collective.
Yes. So the Serendipity Collective was something that a new colleague of ours who joined us, who's London-based, who joined us from another organization just at the end of last year. And we are quite excited about that. So he brought this initiative over to us, which is called the Serendipity Collective, and which we have now taken on and which we are running for the first time on the 10th and 11th of May. And the idea here is to really bring, to look for like bold and wacky ideas that haven't really been voiced before. And we are trying to coalesce them around teams which are made of people with a science background, but also people coming from the arts and people coming from the social sciences and the humanities. Because we think that at the crossroads of the coming together in the mix of these different expertise areas and also the views on things and views on how the future should look like and what is possible in the future and what we should achieve is, quite frankly, cannot be always left to the scientists and the engineers. So you need different expertise and you need different views on things. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with the Serendipity Collective. So really embarking on almost on a journey of science fiction, having that complemented with 2 people, inspiring people from the art space and also from the science fiction space, and really trying to push these ideas that haven't really come forward yet to really get them funded and get them developed.
I mean, what I like about this is I think it's important to develop devices to push people to think about things that seem really hard. So one of the things that we pick up on in Doc's talk is these places where even in amidst unaddressed problems, there are sub-problems which haven't been resolved because they just seem too difficult. And what I like about the Serendipity Collective is it feels like a way or a mechanism of having people flex their assumptions as to what is possible and what is not possible, which I really loved. We only have a couple of minutes left in this section. And so, Barbara, I wonder if there's anything that you'd want to highlight to the audience in terms of opportunities or ways to engage with SPRIN-D going forward.
Yes, please. I mean, first of all, happy to share my contact details. So if you want to have a particular, if you want to have an in-depth chat about things, feel free to email me. But otherwise, then just feel free to visit the website as well if you want to know more about these initiatives like the Serendipity Collective or the challenge-based mechanism. But I also wanted to echo something that Doc said that really resonated with me. I do think that you shouldn't be limited by putting a problem out there that seems unsolvable or where people say that cannot be tackled, or because I also think that if people are entering the race and if people are really applying to solve that, I think that also tells you something about the people who really want to go for this and who really have that kind of boldness and vision to have a shot on this goal. And so always having a bit of human-centric approach to things rather than just this sort of mechanistic, what kind of science do we need in order to solve this problem, but also what kind of people do we need in order to solve these problems.
Incredible. That's so helpful. Thank you, Barbara. And Doc, anything for the audience here? Any asks or anything that you want to talk about as a last note?
Yeah, so 2 things. One, for my organization, Spark Climate Solutions, which does these sorts of road mappings in climate. They are hiring roles to help with really furthering that enteric roadmap, that methane roadmap, as well as for atmospheric methane removal and climate science. So definitely reach out if you're interested in that, and I can put we can put Spark's link in the chat. On my own end, as I'm building towards a large institute backed by Schmidt Futures, I'm looking for folks who could be really good data science lead for that, doing physics-based modeling. So if you know anyone or that person yourself, reach out. We're doing a really interesting institutional model called a focused research organization, where we basically do an academic research institute outside of academia for 5 to 7 years, and then it kind of self-destructs in the end into new orgs that make impact, whether they be other nonprofits or companies. And so reach out if that model or those roles really are interesting to you. Happy to talk more.
I'm honestly, I'd be happier to have the two of you on the line to talk about the very, very cutting edge. Like, focused research organizations are such an exciting set of initiatives, and to have Barbara from SPRIN-D as well come and talking about what they're doing with sci-fi meeting art, meeting inventors. Honestly, what a pleasure. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.
Dom, Doc, Barbara, thank you. Lots in there. Solving the impossible, zooming back out, actively seeking out neglected spaces, making our jobs as hard as possible for ourselves. The skills required to run and support programs like this that are seeking global challenges to global solutions rather to global challenges. Value of inclusion and access, and the fact that there is space for everybody to participate, and actually it's really critical for everybody to be participating in this. And then lastly, Barbara's last point around what kind of people are applying for this and what kind of people are up for the challenge. That is exactly the kind of people that we're looking to recruit for the Venture Science Doctorate. So thank you, Barbara, for that lovely segue. We're going to move on now to finding out a little bit more about how scoping is done in-house inside Deep Science Ventures. So we're going to hear from Eirini, and we're going to have this deep dive, this workshop into all things scoping, and she's going to lead us through building an outcomes graph with some real tangible examples. So this is Deep Science Ventures' own approach to road mapping, and Eirini is our in-house expert on that. She's head of founder community, and she's also a design engineer, an entrepreneur. She works across academia, industrial research labs, national research centres, and also startups. And she's an EdTech founder in her own right, and also senior research fellow at UCL's Department of Science, Tech, Engineering and Public Policy. She's got a master's in innovation design engineering from Imperial College and the Royal College of Art. And I think that background, to Barbara's point about everybody being around the table to be able to solve these challenges, I think that background that Eirini brings is really special and really unique and really needed for this. So over to you, Eirini.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Claire. Great. Welcome, everybody. Really good to be in that panel. Really good to be among all these interested people. I wanted to talk a bit more about our outcome-centric way at DSV. This is something that we've been developing over around 7 years, 7 generations of founders, and this is the best that we've seen in terms of scoping. So why even do that? Why do we take a design approach to venture science? So currently the status quo in science commercialization is that we do scientific research, we make discoveries, and then sometimes scientists, researchers work with tech transfer officials, professionals, and they interrogate or evaluate the utility of those applications. And this is what is commonly referred as tech push. However, focusing on the how technology solves a particular problem is limiting to many other technologies and many other solutions that we can be taking to solve the same problem. And also for all the applications, there may be a combination of different technologies that can be combined in many different ways, which means that the space of combinatorial innovation is really, really a lot bigger in the case of tech push. So this is why we think it's really important to take a much more design an outcome-centric way and work backwards from the societal outcomes that we want to achieve to identify the ideal solutions and ways of achieving those. And also this is quite important in the context of building ventures, because by doing that, we can select the specific technical components that have a risk, they're sufficiently de-risked and individually to a great extent. So today I will be covering the DSV's scoping ontology, scoping language, how we bring this all together. I'll be giving examples. The scoping language at DSV sits at the core of how we build ventures. It helps us work backwards from outcomes. And by outcomes here, I mean well-formed statements that describe an ambitious action that we want to take to reach a future state. And that future state is a world that is greener, healthier, more regenerative, more equitable, and so on. Using that language, we can also reason about the known constraints, and this can be technical and commercial. It also helps us reason about the possibility of different solutions to these constraints and how important they are. And having done that, we can also describe the kinds of experts that we need to come together and hold those pieces of knowledge and take those solutions to market. And importantly, helps us collaborate more. So having a common ground to talk about things helps people across domains to speak the same language. I also wanted to situate a little bit outcomes graph, or like outcome-centric approach to different schools of thought that we've experimented with or have inspired us in many different ways. I bet you're familiar with knowledge graphs. These are big maps of what we know about the world. They're great at mapping existing pieces of knowledge, allocating gaps in a networked way. However, they don't tell us much about the applications of that knowledge. Another kind of school of thought are technology roadmaps. They're really good for, in a milestone way, presenting different technical milestones that need to be achieved for the final technical products to be developed. However, they're really technocentric. They're not outcome-centered. Usually they're static and they don't classify, for example, those outcomes based on what it takes to move them through stages. Another approach that has inspired us quite a lot, developed by Joel Chan, is called discourse graphs. This is a protocol and a way of representing arguments and claims and evidence about the applications of science in society. And it helps us also capture the creative exhausts of our scoping efforts. However, and they're a lot more focused in academia. So we're capturing claims and evidence and hypotheses in an academic paper, but they need a lot more to be transformed into something that can be used in venture. And the last set of ideas that has inspired us is the sensitivity intervention and tipping point analysis, because we want to be able to reason and intervene in sensitive points in an ecosystem and change whole sectors. So the tipping point analysis really facilitates the path of least resistance analysis, but to our knowledge has been mostly being used in policy. So we've taken bits from all these approaches, and we've developed our own ontology, a language that we use to describe different primitives. Just to recap, scoping is a process by which we work backwards from a desired outcome to improve our understanding, and that is how complete is our scoping of all the possible ways that we can achieve that outcome, how possible we believe different outcomes are today. So based on completeness and possibility, we refer to solutions. And these are things that we believe today are possible. Like, for example, today it is possible to use bacteria to break down the tumor microenvironment. Solutions can also be other companies that have a proven impact on the outcome that we care about. When our completeness, or our scoping is not so full, we refer to hypothesized solutions, and these are things that might be possible today. These can be promising future directions that we want to take that can become solutions the more we increase our confidence in them, or it can be flipped constraints and so on. And another last category in the higher possibility nodes, quote unquote, is tactics. And these are used sometimes to signify some general directions that we may take. Usually they're not as precise or quantified as a solution. Like, for example, we may say that in neuroinflammation in pharma, we may use different kinds of immune cells like microglia or whatever that is, but we are not making them as precise. But we can increase our confidence and make them solutions later down the line. On the lower possibility side, as in items that block our pathway toward achieving the outcome, we have constraints. And these are outcomes that we believe today are not possible, something that blocks us. And typically that can be a challenge, a bottleneck, something that sits at the root cause, like a thermodynamic limit that does not allow us to proceed. We also refer to hypothesized constraints, and these are outcomes that we believe today might not be possible. This can include failed attempts to apply a specific approach to an outcome. It can include assumptions about the status quo that are held by other founders, by investors, by incumbents. It can also be that we don't know the possibility of that outcome because no one has attempted to apply this capability to the outcome. And lastly, on the lower possibility side, we frequently use requirements. And by that, we mean we want to signify something that has to be true for a solution to work. That is usually requires further specification or is very vague, is a generalization. Like, for example, we may say something like all cell and gene therapies must not induce immune reactions, or they must be easy to manufacture. Or like in agriculture, we may say something like any post-harvest facility needs to be relatively close to the farm and so on. And we do collect those requirements early on, and as we increase our confidence, we make them more precise and they move up the ladder to become hypothesized constraints or constraints. So this is these are kind of the building blocks of our scoping ontology. And you may be wondering how it all comes together. And I thought I would just bring this alive using examples from our climate team. This is an illustration of what I'm going to cover next. So usually we start by understanding the high level state of the art. So we map key concepts and key ideas in the field. And importantly, we characterize top level outcomes. So in that case, it's avoiding all greenhouse gas emissions and also removing all excess greenhouse gas emissions. At that level, we are trying to break the problem down into mutually exclusive categories and also collectively exhaustive as much as is possible. And importantly, we want to be really ambitious. So here you can see a constraint that, for example, today is not possible to permanently remove up to 20 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. And it's really important that we constantly push and prompt our founders to be ambitious at that level, because it's much harder to re-ambitionize our approach later down the line. And then when we dive into the prevailing market dynamics and business models, and then we find some requirements that our optimal solution is to fulfill. So in the case of negative emissions technologies, we need the carbon removed to cost $100 per ton. We want to be able to sequester 1 gigaton. We want to store it for 1,000 years, so it needs to be permanent. And we also don't want to mess up with different environmental ecosystems. And it's quite important to collect those requirements and be precise. And we become a lot more precise later down the line, because this helps us prune and clean up and prioritize subsequent approaches. And then this is the same kind of outcome that I was just showing in the previous screen. But we also obviously map different tactics, like different ways of achieving those outcomes. So in the case of negative emissions technologies, we may use abiotic negative emissions, and these are things like leveraging geochemical pathways, like enhancing the weathering rate of rocks, or we may use artificial negative emissions, and these are, you may have heard of direct air capture. There are electrochemical ways by which we can suck out carbon from the air. And within those, obviously, we have a lot more details. Just some examples that our founders have been working on, like the bits in blue. And each of those has its own set of sub-requirements, which you can see implied by the little yellow dots on their left. So when we have done solid scoping at the requirement and tactic level, then we seek more evidence in order to start formulating hypothesized constraints and hypothesized solutions. And by evidence here, I mean, it can take the form of reading academic papers and reports and doing market research and IP research, or we also talk to other founders, we talk to advisors and academics. So it takes a lot of different forms. So for example, in the case of abiotic negative emissions, this is work done by Dr. Kate Murphy. She's one of our founders. She was looking at direct ocean capture. So how can you make the ocean draw down carbon? Currently, this has several constraints as an approach. Like, for example, it's difficult to measure the carbon flux across the ocean. Also, it has when you put things in the ocean, it has an increased risk of negative side effects and unknown risks to delicate interconnected environments. So we do that. This is also an illustration, like in reality, that work is a lot broader and a lot deeper, but this is just to show how it unfolded. But at that level, we also start creating relationships and connect and compare these approaches to identify opportunities. A really important part is we constantly prompt ourselves and our founders to flip those constraints and think creatively. So for example, here in the case of direct ocean capture and changing the alkalinity of the ocean, Kate asked, okay, what if I don't need one of the main requirements of that approach? What if we don't need the ocean? What if we can find safe water bodies on Earth and make those carbon sinks? Which led to a hypothesized solution that it might be possible to capture and store CO2 in open pit mine lakes. And Kate, I mean, this I'm representing in this diagram work of several months. So through really detailed analysis, we ended up creating a company called Aquari, which fulfills the requirements of measurability. So effectively is using flooded open pit mine lakes to capture and store CO2. Those pit mine lakes are contained, so we can measure how much carbon we remove. There are no ecosystem risks because there's no life in those acidic lakes. The costs are really low compared to doing that in the ocean. And also there are no limitations around permits and regulations. So hopefully you can see how we use the requirements we set at the beginning to inform the final solution that we went for. This is another example from, again, from the climate team at the same negative emissions technology branch. This is work done by Harry McPherson. He's one of our founders working on artificial negative emissions. The top level constraint that we face there is that it's currently not possible to remove up to 20 gigatons of CO2 per year by 2050 using direct air capture. And something that we've seen quite a lot across our scoping is a lot of first principles thinking. People ask recursively in lots of different depths, like why? Why isn't that possible? You know, what are the critical bottlenecks in current direct air capture systems? So for example, currently lots of DAC systems depend on critical materials and they need a lot of energy. When we formulate that, we want to then take those bottlenecks into principled statements that the optimal solution needs to have. So in that case, we may say that we want to reduce the dependency on renewable energy, and also an optimal solution needs to have reduced dependency on land. But obviously we don't stop there. We want to be able to quantify, like, how big or how important is that requirement? Can we find evidence about that requirement? And in fact, we can. Like, for example, we know that currently, this is a constraint. It's not possible to reduce the energy consumption of DAC system to a minimum of 600 kilowatt hours per ton of CO2. And then in this case, we want to dive deeper and deeper and use that as a pattern in all our scoping across different sectors. Like, we ask, okay, what are the fundamental reasons for that energy cost? Like, what drives that energy cost? And in that case, what is expensive is the energy needed to regenerate the sorbent, and that is the material that we need to, that absorbs the carbon. We need to heat it up again so it releases the carbon safely. And at that point, we want to do a lot of modeling and techno-economic analysis work to find exactly the metric that we want to optimize for. Like, for example, another constraint at a lower level here is that it's not possible to desorb CO2 at an energy consumption of 520 kilowatt hours per ton. And again, then we ask, okay, how can we resolve that? Why isn't it possible? This is something that constantly our founders are asking. And they're trying to generate different tactics, some ways that they can bypass the constraint. So one way to bypass that constraint is by reducing the temperature requirements for sorbent regeneration. And this is where a lot more creativity comes alive. Like, for example, Harry thought that maybe one way to reduce those energy costs is to find some free energy lying around. And we can use that for DAC. And that gave rise to that hypothesized solution that, well, actually, we might be able to use existing energy gradients, like the waste heat from solar panels. And after lots of modeling and rigorous and analytical work, it came up with the company Calorian, which is about to spin out. So Calorian uses that waste heat from solar modules to deliver direct air capture, the really low energy, high capture rate, then maybe even capture the water from solar panels, You don't use much land because you integrate those modules in existing solar installations, and you combine electrochemical and thermal regeneration to achieve lower energy. So yeah, hopefully you can see this was a summarized version of like 9 months of work, but hopefully you can see some steps and some reasoning that led to us moving in that direction. This is a summary of the different diagrams that I just showed you, and I'm hoping that you can maybe take that away after this presentation and start thinking and applying that in your own challenges and your own outcomes. Something else that I wanted to discuss, the panelists in the previous panel discussed a lot about talent and skills and what makes a good scoper. And this is quite important for us. It's something that we are thinking a lot, especially around training the next generation of venture scientists. So at minimum, we want them to be very creative and also be really good first principles thinkers. So I wanted to share with you a few patterns, a few prompts, like a few moves that we've seen people do. And we are cataloging them. We're making effectively a pattern language for creativity, first principles thinking. So for example, some moves that we've seen people use to generate more ideas, some more creative scoping moves are grouping and relancing. So maybe sometimes changing the taxonomy or like the grouping of different sub-outcomes to find different or new groupings. Like for example, in decarbonizing industrial heat, we want a solution that works well with intermittent renewable sources. So then we started looking, okay, how critical that is for textile and chemicals and kind of different sectors, which led to one part of the grouping. But also like the optimal solution needs to provide a really good thermal range up to 2000 degrees Celsius. So this is another way to group our scoping based on process and how much energy it requires, like in refineries and cements and metal-based durables and so on. Another move that we've seen people use is they find analogies, they use analogies. These analogies can be based on an attribute, like a quality, or they use analogies from different fields, or they search for other outcomes in their scoping that have a similar target or similar metrics and can use them creatively. Or we also seeing people scaling up outcomes to more universal forms and more universal scope. And they're trying to find a theoretical maximum versus what is currently possible. And this pushes us to think more creatively and in a more ambitious way and start answering the question, okay, what is the difference between the current metric versus kind of the maximum potential of any such kind of outcome? And then on the other hand, we have moves and patterns and prompts that helps us get to first principles faster and more effectively, hopefully. These are things like we constantly do root cause analysis. You may have picked it up from my examples, like asking why recursively really takes us quite deep and trying to understand if there are any assumptions hidden at any level. Other kinds of moves is we're trying to be a lot more precise and find the target metric. And then we play around, what if we double that? What if we change this parameter to see if the outcome would change in any meaningful way? Another example is zooming out and mapping all the different options to see if we've kind of missed any category and so on. But this is just examples. We have a bigger list, and this is something that we definitely will be sharing and training our venture scientists to use, and we want to open that up a lot more to many more people to add and contribute and use, hopefully. I'm reaching towards the end of my presentation. You might be wondering, where are we? There was a comment around note taking. Where do we store all that knowledge? We've experimented with quite a few different systems. One is we have a prototype inside Rome, which is a networked hyperlinked knowledge base. It's like a Wikipedia for outcomes. And we also experimented with a lot more visual ways of mapping that using tools like Miro. But what I'm really excited about, something that we've currently been developing, is we are taking what I just described for the past 20 minutes, and we are trying to train AI systems, large language models to do that work, and with us and then for us eventually. So we're training, it's called it's a new prototype called Elman. We're training large language models to reason like venture scientists. generate different ideas, explore possible pathways concurrently, and then bring that back to us that can help us make better decisions and find better outcomes of different challenges. So cannot see your faces. I'll stop here. I hope that I gave you the building blocks. I give you an overview of how we do it, how we put it together, and hopefully you'll start using it. If you want any help, please reach out. We'll be very happy to discuss and see how we may work together to keep on developing this. Thank you.
Thank you, Eirini. I think you really brought it to life for people, you know, that have no prior knowledge of scoping. People like myself, I think it's really helpful. For those that are technical experts, I think it's been really useful as well. So my takeaways are: this is, correct me if I'm wrong, this is systematic, it's intentional, it's precise, it's discipline or sector agnostic necessarily, it's inherently creative, and it's absolutely totally outcome centric. And I think all of those things, as a STEM undergraduate and as a science PhD, I don't think I ever got taught any of those things.
Absolutely. And I think that's the difference, like the first slide, the first point I made about the current way of tech push and like thinking from technologies first rather than applications and outcomes. Yeah. This is something that we definitely, I think it's really worth seeing that praxis develop, like different road mapping efforts, different scoping activities at the level of the PhD, but also at the level of creating new ventures. So yeah, excited about that.
Super, thank you. I think the words like foresighting, horizon scanning, scoping, they're all used really interchangeably. This is definitely scoping that we're talking about. Is that right?
Yes, that's a really good point. We're not doing, I mean, implicitly, we are doing some horizon scanning. Like we are forecasting how the world will be in 5 and 10 years from now, when we are looking at the demand for different minerals, for net zero and so on. So we are doing that in some ways, but this is not the main focus of what we do. Then the question that we're trying to ask is, okay, what should we be doing in the different worlds that will be unfolding in front of us? So yeah, we could be doing maybe a little bit more of horizon scanning, but I think it's implicit quite a lot in what we do.
And how much of all of this thinking, I mean, you say you show a visual and actually it's like a year's worth of work or something to get to that point, but how much of all of this thinking has been developed in-house at Deep Science Ventures, and how much has really been borrowed from other areas and from design thinking, etc.?
Yeah, it's a really good point. We've taken inspiration and we've experimented with other schools of thought. Like, for example, discourse graph has been a really big inspiration for us. We've played with knowledge graphs as a way of structuring and organizing, finding nodes and their relationships. So I think we build in the shoulders of giants. I mean, we brought references and ideas from all those different approaches, but what you see here is developed in-house for the large majority. We've seen our founders really, really closely. We've reviewed evidence on like literature on how we use analogies for invention and discovery, and we're putting all that together, and we've built ventures using that. So in a way, it's also a tested way to build science-based ventures.
Super, thank you. My last query is, how widely adopted is this at Deep Science Ventures? Can you give our audience a sense? Is everybody skilled in it? Will it just be for the Venture Science Doctorates to do, the candidates to do? Or is it across the whole organisation?
Yeah, all of us at the core team, our current founders, currently, just to give a sense of the numbers, we built 35 companies. They have been using a version of that. The most latest that I just presented is being used by at least 15 founders and the rest of the core DSV team. And it would definitely be used by the venture scientists. But I mean, that's why we are doing those webinars. That's why we write about it. We want a lot more people to be reasoning and thinking and fitting into that. So hopefully a lot more people. So if you find it interesting or helpful, let us know.
That's super. Thank you, Eirini. That's fab. So we're going to move on now. Just before we move on, actually, there's been some queries in the Q&A about the chat being disabled. That's fine. It's supposed to be like that. Please pop all of your queries for all of the speakers today into the Q&A instead. So we're going to move on, and thank you, Eirini. I'm super excited. We've got two really fab speakers joining us next, both from the US. So following Eirini's walkthrough of how our DSV founders are using scoping, we're going to zoom out a little bit and look at different institutions that employ scoping and road mapping, and really what it enables in their organisations. So I'm joined by Craig Gravitz, Director of Project Accelerator Transition Innovation Office, it rolls off the tongue, at ARPA-H, previously at the US's Defence Logistics Agency, with a background in law and the arts. And I'm also joined by Dr. Sam Arbesman, Scientist in Residence for Lux Capital, to share some insights on the purpose and the impact of road mapping institutions. So Craig, I'm going to come to you first of all. So we're all really familiar with the ARPA model, supporting really high impact innovation following DARPA's success in defence. At ARPA-H, the focus is really on investing in high risk, high reward biomedical and health innovations. You've got this huge budget to do so as well, endorsed by Biden himself. Can you tell us a little bit about what scoping means in your organisation, and who participates?
Yeah, for sure. Well, first of all, kind of piggybacking off some of the questions and from the last panelist. So prior to coming to ARPA-H, I ran a rapid prototyping team, and one of the things that's really important to me are various methodologies and how to actually employ them in a government setting. So like lean innovation, human-centered design thinking. And one of the things that I have done very intentionally is in ARPA-H's life cycle, incorporate all of those different things and kind of tracked it and mapped it to the life cycle of an ARPA program. And so what I think you'll see, which is really interesting, is how you can take an existing validated model in the government, DARPA, and then also bring in some of the kind of best practices that have emerged over, the last, beyond 60 years that DARPA has been in place. And actually, if you wouldn't mind, I actually just want to I won't kill anyone with PowerPoint. I just want to share a quick slide because I think it really highlights that. So while I'm pulling that up, so the reason why the Project Accelerator is a mouthful is we work at ARPA. The most important thing is to work backwards into an acronym. And so I decided I wanted to be called PATIO. And so it's easier to just refer to us as patio. It's also very welcoming. Say, come hang out on the patio with us. Okay, so can you all see the slide that I have up?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
So what I did, and we just had our first birthday here at ARPA-H. And for the first year, we're really building the infrastructure, and now we're ready to launch. We are open for business. And so for the first year, as we're building kind of the infrastructure and the system to be able to launch, what I did is I really, used my design background to go through and do a discovery process. So what I did is I talked to the other ARPAs, so like DARPA, they have their Embedded Entrepreneurs Initiative, ARPA-E has their Tech to Market program. There's other similar groups like BARDA has their Drive program. And then, other like incubators, accelerators, university tech transfer groups. And basically what you see is at the bottom, those are the best practices that all of those organizations use. And at the top, that's pretty much the ARPA model. And so if you're talking, here about road mapping, this is how plan to do it. So just walking you through it, you start with your program design. And so this is where the program manager, who's kind of the key, the nexus of everything that happens. And in ARPA, they're going to put out this broad agency announcement where they have the calls of the various people in industry, academia who are going to help build their programs with them. Well, one of the ways that my team helps at that point is we'll do market assessments, kind of working with like venture groups or other folks who understand market dynamics, so that when a program manager starts out to investigate a new area of science, they're not going and covering ground that someone else has already covered. It's really key at an ARPA that we do something that no one else can do, either in government or in industry. And so we're going to support it that way. So then during the broad agency announcement development, so the BAA, this is the mechanism we use to solicit proposals. at that point, we're starting to develop technical milestones with the program manager. Again, these are all things that would typically happen, at a VC or something like that. We're really building basically, an internal accelerator. Then as you go on in the program lifecycle, now picture the program manager is, seeing whether things work. There might be 10 performers that get awarded under a BAA. Some of them are going to fall off and won't be successful, but some of them are going to succeed really well. And at that point, you really need to start thinking about, what happens if you're the dog that catches the car, what happens? So you want to start to develop MVPs, so minimum viable products, to make sure that these solutions are actually trustworthy, accessible, affordable for our customers. You also want to start to de-risk it for investors at this point. As I mentioned at the top, if we're doing our job right, we're actually not going to be doing things that anyone else has done before. So the government will buy down that risk for industry. And so that way, at this step, we're starting to make it more attractive to investors, so that investors will look at our solutions and, be willing to kind of adopt them after they graduate. We're also at this point, helping to demystify the regulatory process for our performers. You're probably dealing with a small co at this point that doesn't have, deep experience, like, navigating the FDA. And if we're doing something really innovative, there might not be a process at the FDA to approve it anyway. So we're helping them walk through that. So let's assume we've started to do that. Now you're moving on to maturing a project. This is where you start to think about IP protection, how you actually form the company. So we might be at this point bringing in an entrepreneur in residence and attaching it to our performer. And then also you're building up the business strategy, the legal and marketing services, so that they can start to sell their wares. And then finally, that last step is graduation. Like, success to ARPA-H is not an academic paper. It is, we like to say, surviving in the wild. And so we'll help facilitate, third-party investment, mentorship, access to other kind of gatekeepers to make sure that the projects survive in the wild. Basically, the TLDR is that my office really helps to use this, road mapping and pipeline process, so that while our program managers are developing the science, we can truly, make sure that these solutions hit the market.
That's super. Thank you, Craig. I think what strikes me is that the program manager is absolutely central to all of this in ARPA-H and, those models generally. And so I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about what makes a good program manager. Is it the skills, the mindset, diversity of thought? Because obviously for us with Venture Science Doctorate, we really believe that by creating that program, we're developing the mindset and the skills for not just academics, not just venture creators, but also for future program managers as well, whether it's ARIA in the UK or ARPA-H over there.
Yeah, okay. Program managers are the rarest breed of individuals. So the way that my boss, Renee Wegerson, who's our director, likes to talk about them is their hair and fire. That might have happened to me at some point. But the profile of this person, candidly, the first thing is that the person has to be a genius. They just like Renee, these people are atypical. They are incredibly bright, dedicated. But then there's some other features that might not be so apparent. So number one, you want an individual who can think and act like a CEO. Unlike a grant-making organization where the folks will go and kind of just put money out there and hope something happens, a really good program manager has amazing organizational and management skills. So this person is not only a scientific genius, but can go in and kind of work with those 10 or so performers. Again, Renee likes to call those shots on goal. You put out your broad agency announcement, you're going to have lots of different people doing lots of different things. A good program manager is going to be able to make all of those different pieces work together. Also, what makes a good program manager is someone maybe who's there's different archetypes, but I'll give you my favorite archetype. Someone's maybe mid-career, expert in their field, and they hit a wall, and they just look at something, and it just makes them angry. Like, if only I would do this, there'd be this fundamental trade-off that would break, and my entire field could go in a different and new and more robust direction. And that's what I think makes the best program manager.
Right, that's perfect. It's almost like we briefed you, and we totally haven't, because we didn't know you until recently that you joined in the panels. It's fabulous. Yes. I think with the Venture Science Doctorate, one thing that we're very mindful of is that the candidates come in all forms, and they might not necessarily have a STEM undergraduate, but what we are really looking forward to and super excited is to see applications from mid and late stage career researchers as well. So it's really super and totally on topic. Sam, I wanted to bring you in next. So in your role, both at Lux Capital, but your many research fellow roles and your role as an author as well, can you tell us a little bit about the value of innovation road mapping and how it can transform founder mindsets, how it can transform organizations, etc.?
Sure. No, thanks so much. This is great to be here. Yeah, so the way I think about this is, I guess at a very large system level, my background is I kind of come from like the complexity science and network science world, so I like to think of everything pretty systematically. And so you can think about it both at like the system level of like the individuals, like different, like the kind of space of different types of individuals contributing to science, as well as the space of the different types of institutions. And so at the individual level, the way I kind of think about it is there are a whole host of activities that are very, very important for moving science forward, but there are only a small subset of those kinds of activities that are actually, I guess, valued by scientific academia. So there's like all the things that are valuable, but then only some of the things get you tenure. So like the kind of things that are still really important are helping and advising, or maybe building certain types of software, or building like more focused research or more like focused engineering efforts, or building new companies. All these different things are, or maybe more interdisciplinary work. All these things are valuable, but within academia, it's sometimes hard to push on all those different kinds of things as much as you might like. And so as a result of that, one of the things I've been thinking about is the need for new types of research organizations, new types of institutions. And so for that, kind of going back to this kind of like high dimensional space, the way I think about it is it's great that we have universities or corporate industry labs or certain types of startups, but those are really just like a few points in some high dimensional space of potential institutions that can be doing research or move science forward. And we have to actually, and if this is a high dimensional space, we have to actually explore this. And so actually I built several years ago this catalog called the Over-Edge catalog, which I guess now I was actually looking at it recently, has I think like 75 different types of 75 different institutions. And there's a lot of different things. There's for-profit, there's nonprofit, there's distributed organizations, there's ones that focus on people, not projects, versus specific projects. There's ones that are more time delimited. There's all different kinds of organizations. And by the way, the term Over-Edge, it came from this glossary I found from the cartography world. And I guess in the map maker lingo, if you normally have a map, but occasionally like, there's like some little bit of a mountain that kind of fits outside of the boundary, those are called the over-edges. And I feel like these are the kind of institutions that don't quite fit. And so there's a lot of different types of institutions in this space. And it turns out, one, these different types of institutions allow a wider number of people to actually participate in the scientific endeavor. But in addition to that, it also allows different ways of thinking about science. And so going back to kind of this road mapping part, that is one of the things that is able to be done kind of outside of academia. So academia is very, very good at sort of undirected research. And in many ways does many good things. I don't want to kind of besmirch academic research. When it comes to commercializing research and kind of bringing research forward or into kind of the commercial or startup realm, oftentimes though, it says that, okay, it'll be, a scientist will say, okay, I have an advance. How can I plug this into some pre-existing problem or something that I have, versus saying exactly sort of what Eirini mentioned, like this kind of reverse problem, saying, okay, what are the things we should be thinking about and how do we kind of work backwards? And one of the ways I think about this is there's this great book called Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned by these two computer scientists, Ken Stanley and Joel Wayman. And in it, they kind of discuss this idea that anytime you have this very large, complex problem that's kind of trying to be like where you're trying to search some sort of extremely high dimensional space and you're trying to optimize something or solve some solution or have some sort of objective, it actually turns out that having a specific objective is not always the best way to solve this. Rather, what you need to do is have this sort of like creative kind of interest and novelty-based research, and then generate a number of different stepping stones that can then be put together and recombined in some sort of creative way. Now, on the surface, this seems like, oh, this is actually kind of exactly what academia does. And it does do the kind of stepping stone generation part very well. But when it comes to the part of the process of like recombining these things, actually saying, okay, how can we get to kind of the adjacent possible and figure out where we want to move forward, then academia is not nearly as good. We actually need a much more directed kind of approach to think about this kind of thing. And this is where these kinds of non-traditional research organizations can really step in. And so some examples of ones that kind of think about this kind of road mapping. So Doc actually mentioned this idea of a focused research organization. These are being pushed forward by Convergent Research, which was the founders of it were involved in this idea of creating these FROs, these focused research organizations, which are these sort of time-limited, very focused, almost like hybrid between a startup and a research lab, very well capitalized, working on some sort of problem that has been de-risked in a certain way, but requires a huge amount of capitalization and a huge amount of engineering work. And so having a roadmap of where are kind of the low-hanging fruit problems that can be addressed by a focused research organization is incredibly important. And so they're actually very involved in this kind of road mapping effort. Another organization is Speculative Technologies, founded by Ben Reinhardt, which is sort of a private version of DARPA, where it's kind of focused on certain types of problems that maybe are not as well addressed by kind of the ARPA model or kind of just government in general. I think they're mainly focusing right now on things in kind of manufacturing and kind of adjacent materials areas. But the idea behind that is, let's create these roadmaps of what are not necessarily the low-hanging fruit, but kind of the things that can be moved forward by creating some sort of coordinating function. So we're not saying that they're not necessarily doing those things in-house the way an FRO might be doing it, but they're saying, okay, how can we use the levers of road mapping and money and kind of just like initiative and kind of coordination in order to actually catalyze these things and move them forward. And there's a number of other organizations that are playing with this as well, but I really think, and ultimately it comes down to, I think we just need more novel types of organizations to actually kind of figure out how all the different possible suite of ways that we can move science forward.
Thanks, Sam. I really like what you were saying about the combinatorial aspect as well, and how it doesn't necessarily sit best within traditional academic settings and maybe sort of outside of academia. I wanted to ask you both, actually, are there some examples? I think we're all in agreement here that we want more of this kind of stuff, and we need to do it, at scale. But are there any examples that you can think of, both you, Craig, and you, Sam, of where this is being done really well?
And I would try and I would just kind of to reiterate. I mean, I feel like the FRO kind of model, I think, is a really good example. And I mentioned, and
beyond that,
another one that's kind of interesting at an institutional level is one within the kind of human-computer interaction space, or kind of future computing space, called Ink and Switch, where they are really good at kind of bringing people together for relatively short amounts of time, like 3 to 6 months, and say, okay, work on this project, which in turn we know will kind of feed into the next stage of this kind of like larger roadmap for science. And in this case, it's a very specific area of computer science, but I think they've been unbelievably productive in a relatively short amount of time to kind of generate a huge number of advances in that space.
Thanks, Sam. And what about you, Craig?
Well, I will just say that the most innovative organization is ARPA-H.
Of course.
And if anyone wants to work with us, we have just released our first broad agency announcement. So all of those groups out there doing those great things should come work with us right now. And if you look at our website, and we can circulate this afterwards, but that's the best place to do that. So I don't want to call out anyone specifically, because our job is to work with everybody.
Sure. And do you think that these approaches to road mapping and scoping, obviously we need more institutions doing this, but do you think they should necessarily be mainstream? For example, should we be embedding this in the curriculum of early career scientists and PhDs, like what we'll be doing with the venture scientists? To you first, maybe, Craig.
Yeah. So obviously there's absolutely a difference between things that are fully baked and operational, and things that are more iterative and in the growth phase. So I do think that you need to keep those two domains separate. However, I do think that the more traditional sort of operational domain could use a little bit of of this design and lean innovation mindset. And I'll just give you a specific example of how you can sort of adopt some, but not all. Especially with government, governments need to understand that there is a different way of communicating than in industry or in academia than government has. And so I think it's really important to start to meet people on their own terms. And I think that's actually, if you think of like human-centered design thinking, you know, that empathy with the communities that you're working with, I think is really critical. And so while I don't think that, you know, operations groups, governments can really adopt all of these things all the time, and some of that is to Sam's point, you want to kind of stand up and rapidly tear down certain things. But I do think that empathy with the people that you're engaging with is something that can scale more broadly.
Thanks, Craig. Sam, did you want to come in?
Yeah, and I totally agree with all that. I mean, I definitely think, I mean, we need more of this kind of thinking. The way I kind of view this is it's not an either or. It's not kind of just like curiosity-based undirected research or kind of using road mapping to kind of understand needs and figuring out the scoping and everything like that. I think it's more allowing, and we need both of these, and they're very complementary.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes even like in my own work, I'm much more partial to the curiosity stuff, but I also recognize that we need this other thing as well. It's incredibly valuable, and exposing this to students as early as possible will give them a much broader sense of understanding how their research can kind of fit into other different parts, and and really kind of just giving them a sense of like the true scope of ways of thinking about scientific progress and advancement.
Super. I think I wonder, it'd be good to get both of your thoughts on where do you see the biggest need for this new type of talent, these venture scientists? Obviously it's complementary, it's not either or, but you know, where do they really promise to transform organizations or sectors? Is it within ARPA-H? Is it at Lux Capital? Is it somewhere else? Do you want to go first, Sam?
Sure. I guess the way I would say it is, I mean, because we haven't tried it at a large scale, it's almost one of these kinds of things where I think we're not even entirely sure or certain yet where we actually need these. It's like
Yeah.
Until you realize that this thing has been missing, we don't realize how much we've needed it. And so for me, this is kind of a long way of saying I don't know, but I think it's kind of an informed I don't know, which is I think we kind of really need to run this experiment to actually learn where these kinds of people and this kind of approach can really blossom.
Yeah, Craig, would you agree with that?
It sounds like Sam and I have a lot in common, for sure. Experimentation, absolutely, and I don't think that you know until you try. It's kind of that you know, the whole design, build, test model. So you know, I think you need to drop these folks into different organizations and see what happens. I'll actually call out an organization in the U.S. government that I think does this really well. There is a group called the Presidential Innovation Fellows that go into different government organizations, and they kind of parachute in as these SMEs to do. Yeah, exactly. And so I think the PIF, they're called, the PIF program does this particularly well, and they kind of pathfind. And you know, sometimes they're able to scale inside those organizations, and sometimes it's a little troubling. But to Sam's point, you know, you don't know until you actually drop them in as those you know, innovation insurgents.
Yeah, absolutely. Sam and Craig, thanks so much. Do you want to say, is there anything else you want to add before we move on to the next session?
Thank you. And yeah, thanks for this opportunity. I would just kind of say that, and I think kind of echoing what Craig was saying in terms of like experimentation, is I think right now, too many of us have this fairly blinkered view of the ways of doing science and the type of institutions, and we just need to expand that vastly, and then we can kind of see what is actually possible. Yeah,
absolutely. And Craig, a last thought from you.
Thank you for having me. Totally agree with Sam. He knows what's up.
I love that. Thank you both. So we'll move on. I'm really conscious of time, and we're finishing soon, but we've still got a lot to squeeze in. So I'm going to bring in Thane now. So you've heard from Thane earlier on at the start of the webinar, and he's project leader here at Deep Science Ventures. And he has been working full time on the Venture Science Doctorate for almost 2 years now. He's back in, and he's just going to share a little bit more about the new type of PhD that we've been talking about, why we're launching it, when we're launching it. The first candidates are starting in September this year, and really how our approach to scoping underpins the curriculum and the whole methodology. So over to you, Thane.
Thanks, Claire. And Thanks to our panelists and everybody for coming out. This is going to be the last kind of session to kind of bring you in, and we'll have some Q&A after me. I want to tell us why we set out to do this, what some of my motivations are, and I also want to go through the curriculum that we've built, the kind of 3-year journey that you experienced on the Venture Science Doctorate. So let me first just start by telling you why I'm so excited to be leading this initiative. I loved my PhD. It was a fascinating and challenging experience, and I got to do important work to improve patient outcomes. And so I worked at the cutting edge of medical imaging, 3 universities working together with 2 large corporates. And this super group was tasked with building an optic fiber microscope that would go into the human lung. And I developed a imaging method that allows us to start to actually read the immune system and get that microscopic data out for real-time decisions in hospitals. And so this could really speed up clinical trials. It was exciting to be a part of a project that would also give us more accurate diagnosis and disease monitoring in the lung. My training gave me a greater awareness of the innovations that we need in medical imaging specifically. But when I finished, I wanted to know how can actually that process that I went through, doctoral training, supply the science and technology workforce to meet the challenges that we have been talking about today and talking about unpicking and unlocking. If you start getting into what PhD training is and its history, it's changing all the time, actually. And so we do have room to improve its role, specifically towards road mapping and sort of mainstreaming that as a technique in scientific training. And also, I think, touching on some of the points of growing this practice and getting more of the kind of CEO, DARPA program manager type mixed person trained and out there. We need to be thinking about how this form of training is building up science clusters and organizing units of science at an ecosystem level that are challenge driven. And we can do that. There's actually a lot of space for that improvement. If you look at things like patenting, one of the main ways science solves problems today, where in the US, where there's lots of innovation coming out, but still it's 2 in every 100 STEM PhDs who are actually patenting their research. I think we can do more to arm graduates with the real world insights and tools that they need to make meaningful technologies. And so that was a big driver, specifically through scoping, where we practice making these large-scale societal aims the focus and the core of everything that our research projects are about, analyzing industries to find constraints and find ways around them. But patents aren't everything. We also then need skilled people to run with that knowledge and to take it into market, to take it and fundraise, to develop a product pipeline around that. And so 80% of UK STEM PhDs actually don't continue in scientific careers after they graduate, which is a massive loss, I think, and a shame, because 80% of STEM PhDs actually according to Nature. And so we have that on the one side. Meanwhile, communities and governments are struggling to find skilled people at scale. Skills gaps of over 100,000 in the life sciences sector in the UK, the AI sector. Meanwhile, the climate crisis is brewing, and we've got things to do in terms of accelerating our pandemic response. So we need both these tools that are generating really useful societal knowledge and applying science in that way, but also bringing us people who will do that carrying into the workforce and then actually create jobs around that knowledge. We can, I think, taking this back to the PhD itself, smooth the commercialization path for high impact inventions, particularly those with strong market pull to create deep tech jobs. And something I'm very passionate about because my own research in technology was endorsed by GlaxoSmithKline and supported, but our commercialization process where I was training was retroactive and unclear at that point. And so instead we could have one that was proactive and clear and automatically moves what we know to be proven technologies with strong market pull forward. This is why I'm so excited to be working from DSV, launching the Venture Science Doctorate, because we've so far founded 35 companies with amazing technical founding teams. These are people that work in hard science fields such as therapeutics, chemicals, engineering, nanotechnology, robotics. They're in industries that DARPA expert Bill Bonvillain would describe as complex, established legacy sectors. Complex sectors that we still need to do a lot of work in to pull forward and to make progress in, such as energy, chemicals, healthcare, semiconductors, and agriculture. Example of some of these companies include Mission Zero, a company which, inspired by the way the human lung concentrates CO2, has developed a biomimetic process for direct air capture, and accordingly have been funded by Bill Gates and Elon Musk. Imtune, a company which manufactures revolutionary cell therapies in the body itself, harnessing our immune system to produce life-saving drugs, and funded by OpenAI's Sam Altman. And Rhizocore, a fungal technology company which grows hyper-resilient, deep carbon sequestering forests by deploying cutting-edge bioreactor design. And we form these companies from first principles, from the outcome working backwards, as you've been hearing so much of today, through scoping, totally and completely agnostic to the technology, instead obsessively focused on the target commercial and social outcome. Building on the success of that process, the Venture Science Doctorate embeds ideas early into the research process and into the PhD itself. As you've been hearing from our panelists, we urgently need to think about how we're leveraging innovation road mapping and the specific skill sets around it, where this is going overlooked in traditional science training. That overlooking that today is I think, a massive disadvantage to society. And we've heard of a lot of exciting work that's going on that will be really useful where innovation road mapping is being applied. Particularly training people to take these research projects forward and answer the kinds of questions entire nations need answered. If you're interested in the kind of national and global case for some of what we're talking about today, we actually wrote a policy proposal with the Day One project, Forging 1,000 Venture Scientists to Transform the Innovation Economy. So you'll find more info there. But even before this policy proposal, I was well aware that we needed new programs to make these improvements, because my PhD actually allowed me to come to DSV for 3 months and see this kind of solution being worked out in this process for innovation road mapping. And so my time at DSV helped me to realize when I went back how well-resourced and actually the opportunities that we have at university as PhDs, the freedoms that we have actually to take some of that mindset and bring it back to the same environment and think, okay, we are free to be walking into the offices of world-leading experts to come up with powerful interventions for real commercial needs, and then to go right back to the bench and actually start prototyping. And so why is that not happening today is a big question. Why is it somehow strange to talk about PhD training that way today? And how could we make this the norm for dedicated and inventive people? The Venture Science Doctorate is our answer to truly optimized, inclusive runway for deep tech entrepreneurship. And our vision is to give the world's most diverse and entrepreneurial innovators the freedom, the networks, and the investment they need to solve the world's hardest problems. We're doing this with a world-class multinational coalition of universities, industrial research teams, government agencies, and the venture ecosystem. And this September, the first venture scientists will start scoping. In 3 years, they'll have built VC-backed companies in health and climate. And they won't stop there, neither will we. In 10 years, we will scale to training 1,000 venture scientists per year. Let me tell you a little bit about the Venture Science Doctorate, the principles that are so key to it. This is a 3-year program, which is venture focused, it's outcome centric. It's a program nested in a distributed institution, and it's run diversity first from recruitment to incorporation. We're venture focused. And so from curriculum, from selection criteria, we train combinatorial innovators to build ventures. We're outcome centric in that each candidate spends a full year conducting this scoping bottleneck analysis on their sector. Being a distributed institution means that after year 1, candidates are matched with a sequence of the world's most entrepreneurial professors and lab leaders, opening their labs to combine techniques across disciplines. And being diversity first, our program is designed from recruitment through to mentorship, through to pedagogy, to be a path for women and Black and minority ethnic individuals and all of us. It's a curriculum that builds the traits of our ideal science founder into everything that we're training. And it actually begins to remove barriers that are holding back STEM PhD and access to it. So we spend much time thinking about the ideal science founder at DSV, their attitudes, their knowledge and skills, and traits like magnetism, like concise storytelling. We've designed every learning objective to pass on these competencies and habits of mind. And these are what we find in our best founders across genders, nationalities, and ethnicities. People with these traits make stronger applicants to the VSD, and so that we're actually broadening access to STEM PhD by recruiting people of all races and backgrounds, not for the content of their CV primarily, but the content of their character, the things that they really love to build and do. And so with new incentives for societal impact, with broader access to STEM PhD training, we're making science and technology more equitable for all. In health, in climate, in agriculture, and in computation, you can build a sector scale company in 3 years. This is what it looks like. Before recruitment and training, we work with universities and industry to begin to define clusters of commercial challenges, a bit like Eirini was speaking about earlier. And so we're working with Imperial College London, the Mayo Clinic, the Henry Royce Institute, the UK's National Manufacturing Institute, Cornell University, and more. Let's say we recruit you into this process. In year 1, you would use scoping with a DSV venture supervisor assigned to support your project from day 1. And starting with that high-level societal outcome, you would map what's happening in industry, you would reveal constraints, and you would develop your hypothesized solutions and begin evidencing them. Your approaches would become research projects, which we can then rank using the language of that scoping system by impact and by feasibility. And in year 2, you would enter the lab. You'd begin prototyping. In year 3, that would probably take you into a different discipline. You could complete your prototyping by moving to a different lab, a different department, a different country to build out that emerging technology with the collaborators that we have now standing by to support the completion of that emerging tech. And then you would build your team and raise seed investment. Here, your venture supervisor can guide you. And so let's imagine you join the Venture Science Doctorate, taking clean energy production from chemical waste as your high-level outcome. You could identify the increasing fertilizer use that's happening in agriculture. Over the next 5 years, you could quantify that. And with the constraint there that fertilizer spillovers are actually polluting rivers, that they nitrify and kill fish. And so in year one, you could conceive of a way to convert that fertilizer waste into green hydrogen. In year two, you could enter a leading synthetic biology lab at UCL, let's say, engineer a bacteria that could actually be fit for this conversion, chemical reaction. You might find that your bacteria don't work when you take them to a river full of dying fish. And so in year three, you could move labs, perhaps working now at Cornell University with polymer chemists to encapsulate your bacteria in a protective layer. That might also be the part of the technology that stores the hydrogen. Your clean tech produces a valuable fuel while reducing environmental damage. You could recruit co-founders and fundraise with DSV. In 3 years, you would have leveraged cutting-edge research and curated an expert community for one of the most important science companies in your industry. The Venture Science Doctorate would be awarded, recognizing your systematic approach and extraordinary dedication to solving hard problems in deep tech. The research teams you work with would benefit too. And so VSD is designed for partner labs to amplify their impact together. It's a place where you accelerate your career by working on solutions to challenges that you really care about, academics and candidates. And so not every scientist, not every lab is trying to solve these sort of societal grand challenges. Those that are can find the pattern of grant funding today for research, for papers, and then for more grant funding, a little underwhelming. VSD is your opportunity to identify the commercial challenges that we really need to be tackling next on steering groups with world-leading entrepreneurial researchers. So consider joining our growing R&D coalition for this, having devices, reagents, and data sets that are born in your lab become unique assets for prestigious collaborations and publications. All of this would be fantastic, but we would hope that your main thrill as a host lab would be actually changing the lives of people, benefiting from the inventions that you enabled. I've had the privilege and thrill of speaking to fascinating young researchers, policymakers, university leadership, founders, funders, and many more who all care about VSD and the future of the PhD system. At this point, I hope you've enjoyed hearing about scoping and about how VSD looks and feels. Our applications are actually open now. They close May 1st. We would love to hear from you. Please apply now. And thank you so much for tuning in. Claire, I'm gonna pass back to you now.
Super, thank you, Thane. I always really love hearing you speak so passionately about the Venture Science Doctorate. And just a reminder to everybody that's on the webinar to go back, and if you haven't already seen it, watch the VSD unveiling webinar that we did back in October, about 6 months ago now. And that's all on the website as well, the Deep Science Ventures website, also on YouTube, and it gives you a little bit more context, or a lot more context, and there's a whole webinar devoted to what the VSD is. So definitely go and check that out. We've got just a couple of minutes left, but we might go over by a few minutes if that's okay, just because I want to squeeze in some questions. We've got quite a few coming in on the live Q&A, and then also I think we've all got all of our own as well. So Antonio asks, who is providing research infrastructure to the PhD students? Thane.
Yeah, and so we're doing that in the distributed institution structure. So working with the Mayo Clinic, with Imperial College London, the University of Edinburgh, University of Glasgow. So we want, in the first instance, candidates to come and sit with us and really master scoping. There's a lot to dig into there, and that is how you would design a set of research projects that you could then move the best of those forward. You would move it forward then from wherever you are in a kind of decentralized virtual format to then one of the labs in our network that I've been mentioning.
Super, thank you. Then we've got we have various people asking who can apply, who is eligible, and I think the answer we know, Thane, is that anybody from anywhere. And then quite a few questions around the logistics and the sort of practicalities of visas, etc. So just to say that we are seeking the ability to sponsor academic visas, and we can already sponsor visas for post-graduation. So that's a work in progress. Donna is asking, what do you expect this amazing program, thank you Donna, will bring to the STEM ecosystem in the next 5 years? So just fast forwarding, I guess in 5 years time, year 5 for us, we'd have had obviously 5 cohorts, but we'd have scaled significantly. What do you imagine we'd have brought to the ecosystem by then, Thane?
Yeah, and so scaling the program every year means that we would have trained tens of VSD candidates by then. And what I hope that would start to do is, with this kind of coordinated starting point and scoping, that actually you'd see synergies between the different companies. So some of the founders scientists who come into DSV today and become founders, actually use scoping to find multiple investable ideas, business ideas that we see should become companies, and they create a little cluster themselves. People create 2 and 3 companies, and then we build out founding teams with them. We help them get funded. And so I think that would be a really powerful way to sort of signal we can be leveraging these kind of accelerated learning techniques and actually helping people to launch multiple companies in parallel. We've got serial entrepreneurs. I think we can have parallel entrepreneurs. But also, I think the most important thing we can do for the ecosystem is promote mindset change. And so the opportunity that you have as a scientist is absolutely like mind-boggling. If you go into some of what, you know, Sam was talking about, Craig at ARPA-H, Barbara and Doc and everyone that you've been hearing from today, those kinds of opportunities, I think we sometimes get into scientific training, we put our heads down, we try to get the papers out, and we forget that that's all still to play for. And then, you know, I mentioned right at the start, some people who a few years into that process sort of wake up and think, what am I doing with my research? I'd really love to encourage people to take these tools, to be really driven and take ownership of their own research projects and aim at their own moonshots. We'd love to kind of popularize that.
Yeah, and we've got lots more coming in. I want to try and squeeze in as many as we can. Patricia's asking, can I apply to the Venture Science Doctorate with an existing research and venture idea? Dom, did you want to take this one?
Yeah, I was just to say, what we typically do, obviously, is work backwards from an outcome to an idea. And so what we do, if you already had an idea, is we'd fast forward to that outcome and ask and treat the VSD as an opportunity to ask, is the idea you've had the optimal way of solving that outcome, and explore widely around it. And so I strongly encourage you to come to the program open-mindedly and make full use of the faculty, which is this kind of opportunity to think about the optimum impact that you personally could possibly have. You definitely don't need an idea to apply. You just need to really care about solving a broad societal outcome.
Super, thank you. And for either of you, lots of questions about the recruitment process, what to do next. And we've got one quite specific query. Would a 25-year plus experienced software professional around 50 years old be eligible to? And I think the answer is yes, this is open to everybody. Do you want to say anything about the recruitment process and next steps, perhaps? Perhaps Thane?
Yeah, I've been massively excited by the hundreds of people that are writing in so far, and it's really broad. So we do get people asking us before they apply, is it for me? usually the answer is yes. You know, we've got people from so many different countries, Japan, Turkey, Ghana, Iran, Pakistan, India. It's really amazing, and we're looking forward to building like an eclectic cohort of very driven innovators and people who think differently about science.
That's great. Do we have any more questions for the other panelists, the other speakers you've heard from today? Just pop them in the Q&A now, and I'll try and gather those up as we start to summarize. So I think we've squeezed in a lot. We've heard from Thane and Abby back at the beginning, 2 hours ago now, it seems like ages ago, gave us an introduction to the practice of scoping. Thank you for joining us, Abby. We've heard from Dom, Doc, and Barbara on different approaches to road mapping and its value for founders, essentially, you know, ultimately doing the impossible. We had Eirini's wonderful workshop into how Deep Science Ventures founders use scoping and our really quite unique approach to that. Some great examples from Craig and Sam on scoping institutions and the compelling case for more, which is what we want to hear. You know, that's great. They have, you know, different views on how and where to use innovation road mapping, but really good to see that their alignment on it being central to creating venture scientists, you know, that care and they care, and they're impactful, they're making impactful R&D rather, and they're caring about venture creation, and that this really matters. So I think Craig said something about, you know, the best program managers are those that are atypical. They have to be scientific, but also to some extent social geniuses and leaders in their own right, and particularly important opportunity for mid-career and pivoters. And then Sam was really sort of advocating for this new type of organisation, something that is totally complementary to the traditional research base that we've got. And on the Venture Science Doctorate as well, Thane explained why scoping training embedded really early on is so key to creating this new kind of talent, the venture scientist, that we use that term all the time. Please start using the term as well, for intersectoral porosity. So this hypermobile new type of talent that can move between two worlds, the venture creation world and the academic research world, simultaneously and effortlessly, and for stronger science clusters. So there's all of the whys in there. Why are we doing this? At Deep Science Ventures, we really believe that we need new kinds of institutions and new kind of pathways. We believe that to create new types of talent, venture scientists who are trained in new ways, including in scoping, are the new types of talent that we need really urgently, and that we need new models of scientific training designed for equality and diversity. And we touched on a little bit of that today, both in academia and in industry as well. So the Venture Science Doctorate is now just 6 months from launch, you know, the first cohort starting, and it's been a couple of years in the making. We've got that backing from the global science policy community, from philanthropic organisations and from corporate sponsors. And we have this supervisory network of the world's most entrepreneurial science professors, a curriculum, the accreditation model, delivery partners, but there is still time to join us. So as we've been urging you during this session, we want to hear from you, we want to work with you, and whether you're a researcher, a potential supervisor, graduate, funder, diversity champion, founder, a national lab, we'd particularly love to hear from you on curriculum development still. It's almost there, on diversity and on community building. And if you want to be a part of that first cohort, do apply now. Now is the time. I'm just going to check back and see if we've got any more Q&As coming in for the rest of our panelists. It looks like most of them are around the recruitment process. Somebody is saying competition is going to be fierce. I love that. I think we can say it already is, Thane. Do you want to say a quick word about that?
Yeah, so we've had about 200 applicants in about a month, and we've had lots of appetite for this webinar, so maybe more people will be joining off the back of this. What I can say is, if you're capable of already demonstrating that you're really entrepreneurial, you've maybe already started thinking in those terms in your own work. If you're going after some really large challenge, like some of the ones that we've been banging on about today, you will find that you're in the top percentile of people. If you scan the application QR code, you'll find a set of entry requirements, but also the attitudes and traits that I was talking about, things like actually empathy and first principles thinking, obviously linking to scoping. So the slide before, those are really key as well. We see those as very important to someone successfully making it through this journey.
Yeah, and we've had some more coming in as well. You know, what if a candidate brings their own funding? We hadn't planned for that, Thane, but would you like to go back to that one?
I don't think that would be a problem, Claire. And so not a lot of people are doing that, and happy to see that in the application.
Yeah, and the last one coming in is, sorry.
Actually, I could say just on that, sometimes people wonder, obviously, about IP ownership. And so we really want candidates to own their IP and take these companies forward. And so funding sometimes plays a role into that. And maybe that question was around, would the program be different? Would I own everything that I'm inventing? You would own those things anyways. So please do just throw that into your application.
The last one coming in is really around the admission process and the timelines, and wondering if there's going to be sufficient time for particularly international candidates to participate between now and actually when this first cohort applications closes 1st of May this year, and September when they would start.
Yeah, and I think that's a very variable question depending on where you're coming from and depending, you know, whether you need a visa or different types of support. It's one that we're familiar with. So we work with founders today in over 24 different countries. I personally had to sort this kind of visa status thing out for my own PhD. So, you know, we're sympathetic to those concerns. We work with people in that way often. And so please do drop in your application, and we will support. If you're the best, we will not be not allowing you to apply because of your location. In fact, in the first year, you can be fully decentralized and in your country of residence.
Super, thanks, Thane. So like I say, it's not the end, it's the start of the conversation. If you want to find out more, you know where to go, and you can go back and check this recording out and the one from October as well. Finally, thank you to all of our speakers. We've really tried to squeeze it in today. We've had Thane, Abby, Dom, Doc, Barbara, Eirini, Craig and Sam, and thank you to you for your great questions and on the Q&A and your participation. To the Nucleate community for joining us today, that was really special, and thank you to Noah as well behind the scenes at Deep Science Ventures, supporting with this event. So do stay in touch. You've got all of the details there up on the screen, and speak soon. Bye-bye.